Rain poured over the jagged coastline of Harborview, Maine. The kind of rain that didn't just fall, it punished. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the dock, salt spray mixing with raindrops on her face. In her hand, a crumpled envelope containing $1,000, her last. The waves crashed against the weathered pilings below, each one a reminder of time passing, opportunities fading. She stared at the horizon where the angry gray sky met the darker gray sea. 29 years old, and already it felt like the world was closing in around her. The envelope grew damp in her grip. $1,000. Not enough to save her shop, not enough to start over, just enough to remind her how little she had left. Emily turned away from the ocean and walked back through the small fishing town, past storefronts that had been there since before she was born. 3 generations of Carters had called Harborview home. 3 generations of mechanics and craftspeople who could fix anything with an engine or hull. Now it was just her, the last of the line, the talented mechanic nobody needed anymore. The familiar smell of metal and oil greeted her as she pushed open the door to Carter's Marine Repair. The worn wooden sign above the entrance swung precariously in the wind. The painted letters faded from decades of salt air and neglect. Inside, the vast workshop stood mostly empty now. Where once a dozen boats would have been in various stages of repair, only a single skiff remained. Its owner 3 months late on payment. Emily flipped the switch, and the overhead lights flickered reluctantly to life, illuminating the high ceilings and concrete floors stained with decades of oil and paint. She moved to the workbench and turned on the small radio that had belonged to her father. The hum and whir of machinery that once filled this space from dawn till dusk had gradually diminished over the past year. Now, the last remaining lathe sputtered as she switched it on, the motor straining, coughing, then finally catching. Like the shop itself hanging on by a thread. The machine's diminishing whine echoed through the cavernous space, a mechanical death rattle that seemed to say, "This is ending." She ran her hand over the smooth wood she'd been turning, a replacement tiller for Old Man Peterson's rowboat, probably her last job. The wood was perfect, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. She switched off the lathe, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the machine itself. The sudden shrill ring of the telephone cut through the quiet. Emily wiped her hands on a rag hanging from her belt and walked across the concrete floor. Each ring seemed more urgent than the last. Carter's Marine Repair. The voice on the other end was polite but firm, the kind of politeness that delivered bad news with practiced detachment. The bank. Final notice. 30 days to vacate. Foreclosure proceedings already underway. Emily's grip tightened on the receiver as she listened. Words like delinquent and outstanding balance, and regrettably, floated through the line. She thanked the woman, hung up, and pressed her forehead against the cool metal of the filing cabinet. 30 days. After 3 generations, she had 30 days left in the only place she'd ever called home. The $1,000 in her pocket felt even smaller now. Not enough to make a dent in what she owed. Not enough for a security deposit on an apartment in Portland. Not enough for anything that mattered. She grabbed her jacket and stepped back out into the rain. She needed to walk, to think, to find some way forward that didn't end with her leaving Harborview with nothing but a toolbox and regrets. The rain had lightened to a misty drizzle by the time Emily found herself at Mason's salvage yard on the outskirts of town. Grant Mason, a bear of a man with perpetually greasy overalls, had been buying and selling junk since before Emily was born. His yard was a graveyard of forgotten things: cars, appliances, furniture, and occasionally boats too far gone to repair. Emily hadn't meant to end up here. Her feet had simply carried her while her mind raced with calculations and possibilities, each more desperate than the last. "Well, if it isn't the last, Carter," Mason's voice boomed across the yard as he emerged from his tiny office. "What brings you to my humble collection of treasures?" Emily forced a smile. "Just walking, Grant, clearing my head." "Heard about the shop." He wiped his hands on a rag that might once have been red. "Tough break. Your grandfather would have—" "I know what he would have done," Emily cut him off. She'd heard it all before, how her grandfather would have found a way, how her father would never have let it happen, as if she hadn't tried everything they would have tried and more. She turned to leave when something caught her eye. In the far corner of the yard, half hidden behind a stack of rusted car doors, was the unmistakable shape of a boat hull. Not a modern fiberglass vessel, but old wood, the kind nobody made anymore. Emily changed direction, drawn to it like metal to a magnet. As she got closer, she could see it was in terrible shape. The hull was split in places, the paint long gone except for a few stubborn patches. It was small, maybe 25 feet, with lines that spoke of speed and purpose rather than comfort. "What's the story with this one?" she called over her shoulder. Mason lumbered after her. "That old thing? Been here 6 years at least. Coast Guard brought it in after they found it drifting offshore. Nobody claimed it, and it wasn't worth fixing." Emily circled the boat. Despite its condition, there was something about it. The craftsmanship visible beneath years of neglect, the elegant curve of the bow, the way it sat on its trailer like it was still proud, still waiting for someone to see its worth. "How much?" The words left her mouth before she'd fully formed the thought. Mason laughed. "For that, it's firewood at best, girl." "How much?" Emily repeated, her voice firmer this time. Mason studied her face, then shrugged. "Give me 800 and take it off my hands. Been meaning to clear that space anyway." Emily's hand went to the envelope in her pocket. $800, almost everything she had left in the world. 500, she countered, "and you throw in the trailer." Mason chuckled. "You always were your grandfather's granddaughter. 750, and I'll deliver it to your shop tomorrow. 600, and I'll take it today." They settled on 650. As Emily counted out the bills from her envelope, a voice in the back of her mind screamed that this was madness, that she was throwing away her last chance at a fresh start on a rotting hull that would never float again. But another voice, quieter but more insistent, whispered that sometimes the things that get thrown away are the things that need saving most. Mason helped her hitch the trailer to her old pickup truck. As she pulled away, he called after her, "What are you going to do with that wreck anyway?" Emily didn't answer. She wasn't entirely sure herself, but for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. A spark, a purpose, something to pour herself into for however long she had left in her shop. The ancient trailer creaked and groaned behind her truck as she pulled into the shop's back lot. Getting the boat positioned took nearly an hour, the sun beginning to set by the time she had it where she wanted it. Exhaustion pulled at her muscles, but Emily couldn't wait until morning. She needed to see what she'd bought. She set up work lights around the hull and began a careful inspection. Hours passed as she documented every crack, every missing plank, every spot where water had done its patient work of destruction. The more she saw, the more daunting the task appeared. And yet, there was something about this boat, something that made her want to dream on. Just before midnight, Emily began carefully scraping away a patch of peeling paint near the bow, curious about what might be underneath. As layers of blue, then white, then green flaked away under her scraper, something began to emerge. Letters, faint but unmistakable. Voyager, Voyager. The boat had a name. Emily continued scraping, revealing more of the weathered lettering. And below it, something else. A symbol. As she cleared away more paint, her breath caught in her throat. It was a military insignia, faded but recognizable. A naval marking of some kind. This wasn't just any boat. This had been a military vessel. Emily sat back on her heels, staring at her discovery in the harsh glow of the work lights. What was a military boat doing abandoned in a salvage yard in Harborview? How had it ended up drifting offshore? And most importantly, could she bring it back to life with only $350 left to her name? She placed her hand on the weathered hull, feeling the grain of the wood beneath her palm. "What's your story, Voyager?" she whispered into the quiet night. "And why did you find me now?" The rain had stopped. Through the open bay doors of the workshop, the full moon cast a silver path across the harbor. Emily climbed carefully into the boat, settling herself on what remained of the center bench. In the moonlight, with the shadows hiding the worst of the damage, she could almost imagine what the Voyager had once been. Sleek, powerful, purposeful. She leaned back and looked up at the stars, the gentle rocking of the boat on its trailer almost like being on water. The worries of the day, the foreclosure notice, the dwindling funds, the uncertain future, seemed to recede just a little, For the first time in months, Emily Carter felt something like peace, something like possibility. Here, in the skeleton of a forgotten boat, she found a strange kind of hope. The moon traced its path across the sky as Emily dozed in the boat, dreams of open water and distant horizons washing over her. In those dreams, the Voyager was whole again, cutting through waves with purpose, carrying her away from all that threatened to drown her. Morning arrived with the harsh reality of sunlight exposing every flaw in the Voyager's battered hull. Emily woke stiff and cold, but more determined than ever. She would restore this boat. Not because it made financial sense, it clearly didn't, but because something about it called to her. Because she needed to prove, if only to herself, that broken things could be made whole again. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Emily worked on the Voyager from dawn until well past midnight, stopping only to handle the few paying jobs that trickled in. She cleared out the interior, removing layers of debris and the rotted remnants of seats and storage compartments. She charted every inch of damage, created detailed plans for repairs, and began the painstaking process of removing what couldn't be saved. Her few remaining regular customers watched her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Old fishermen who had known her grandfather stopped by with coffee and unsolicited advice. Most thought she'd lost her mind, pouring her last resources into a boat that, by all reasonable assessment, should have been turned into kindling. The most vocal of these critics was her next-door neighbor, Frank Miller. The hardware store owner had never approved of a woman running the marine repair shop and had been the first to start sending his business to the new fiberglass boat dealership on the other side of town. "You're turning that place into a junkyard, Emily," he complained, standing at the property line with his arms crossed. "Bad enough the shop's going under without making it an eyesore for the rest of us." Emily didn't bother looking up from where she was removing a section of rotted planking. "It's still my property for 23 more days, Frank. I'll do what I want with it." "That thing's never gonna float again," he scoffed. "You're wasting what little time you have left." "Probably," Emily admitted, finally meeting his gaze. "But it's my time to waste." After he left, muttering about property values and community standards, Emily returned to her work with renewed determination. Let them talk. Let them judge. They'd written her off long ago anyway. As she carefully removed the damaged sections of the hull, Emily discovered something remarkable. Beneath the weathered exterior, much of the boat's structure was made from old-growth white oak, dense, tight-grained wood that had largely disappeared from modern boat building. The kind of material that would cost a fortune today, if you could find it at all. She ran her fingers along a section of exposed framing, marveling at the craftsmanship. "They built you to last," she murmured to the boat. "Didn't they?" Still, the assessment wasn't all positive. About 60% of the hull planking was compromised beyond repair. The keel had a hairline crack that ran nearly a third of its length. The stem and transom would need to be completely rebuilt. And that was just the structural work, before even considering the interior or any mechanical systems. The cost of materials alone would far exceed what little money she had left. Even with her skills and tools, this restoration would take resources she simply didn't have. That night, Emily sat at her small kitchen table with a calculator, notebook, and her last beer. The numbers didn't add up, no matter how she manipulated them. She needed at least $2,000 just for materials, and that was cutting every corner possible. She looked around her modest apartment above the shop, taking inventory of what could be sold. Not much. Her tools were worth something, but without them, she couldn't do the restoration. Her grandfather's pocket watch, her father's service medals, the vintage motorcycle she'd rebuilt herself during college, her one real possession of value. The decision should have been harder. The 1972 Triumph Bonneville was the first major project she completed on her own, the thing that had convinced her father she had the Carter touch with machines. She'd turned down offers for it over the years, some quite generous. But now, looking at her options, it was surprisingly easy to pick up the phone and call Theo Jenkins, the collector who'd been trying to buy the Triumph for years. "2,000, tomorrow morning," as she told him, cutting off his excited greeting. "That's my price. Take it or leave it." He took it. The next day, Emily watched as her beloved motorcycle disappeared into the back of Theo's truck. The stack of bills in her hand felt like poor compensation for the hundreds of hours she'd put into that bike. But it would buy the materials she needed. it would give the Voyager a chance. With the influx of funds, work progressed more rapidly. Emily sourced replacement white oak from a specialty supplier in Portland, paying a premium but unwilling to compromise on matching the original materials. She ordered copper rivets, marine epoxy, cotton caulking, and all the other specialized supplies needed for traditional wooden boat restoration. Each day brought new discoveries about the Voyager. The more Emily uncovered, the more she became convinced this was no ordinary vessel. The construction methods, the quality of materials, the attention to detail, all spoke of a boat built for a specific and important purpose. 2 weeks into the restoration, a powerful summer storm swept through Harborview. Thunder cracked overhead as Emily worked late into the night, racing to finish waterproofing a section of the hull she'd been repairing. Wind howled through the gaps in the old building's siding, carrying stinging rain that found every opening. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the shop, and seconds later a torrent of water began pouring through the roof. Emily scrambled to move tools and materials out of the deluge, cursing as water streamed onto her workbench, soaking plans and threatening the expensive marine epoxy she'd been using. She grabbed tarps and began throwing them over the most vulnerable sections, but the water was coming in too fast, from too many places. The neglected roof, which she'd been patching incrementally for years, had finally given up the fight. For hours, Emily battled the leaks, emptying buckets, rigging makeshift channels to direct water away from her work areas, moving everything of value to the few dry corners that remained. By the time the storm passed around 3 a.m., she was soaked through, exhausted, and facing yet another setback. The shop floor was puddled with water, and at least one of her power tools had been damaged beyond repair. She sat on the edge of the Voyager, too tired even to cry. The universe seemed determined to defeat her at every turn. Maybe Frank and the others were right. Maybe this was all just a fool's errand, a desperate last stand that was doomed from the start. As she sat there, head in her hands, a strange sound caught her attention. A faint tapping, rhythmic and mechanical, coming from somewhere inside the boat. Emily straightened, listening intently. It wasn't the random drip of water or the settling of wood. It was too regular, too deliberate. She moved her hand along the inner hull, searching for the source. The tapping stopped. She pulled her hand back, and after a moment it started again. Placing her palm back against the wood, she felt a slight vibration at a specific spot, a section of the hull she hadn't yet examined closely. Emily grabbed a flashlight and investigated the area. What she had initially taken for a solid panel turned out to be a small, cunningly disguised compartment. With careful work and a thin pry bar, she managed to open it. Inside was a flat piece of metal, about the size of a playing card. It had been wedged into the space in such a way that it vibrated against the wood when the boat moved, creating the tapping sound. Emily removed it carefully and held it under the light. It was a brass nameplate, tarnished with age, but still legible. Engraved in precise lettering were the words, Captain Samuel J. Reynolds, U.S. Nighthawk, United States Navy, 1951 to 1953. Emily stared at the metal plate, her fatigue forgotten. This wasn't just any military vessel. This was the Nighthawk, apparently a Navy boat, commanded by someone named Samuel Reynolds during the Korean War. She flipped the plate over. On the back, hand scratched into the metal, were the words, "She brought us home when nothing else could." Emily looked up at the battered hull with new eyes. This wasn't just a restoration project anymore. This was a piece of history, a vessel with a story connected to war, to service, to survival. Nighthawk, she whispered, running her hand along the frame. Your name is Nighthawk. The discovery energized her. The next morning, despite her exhaustion, Emily was on the phone with the local library, then the Maritime Museum in Portland, searching for any information about a Navy vessel called the Nighthawk that might have served in the Korean War. She came up empty. If such a boat existed in official records, it wasn't easily found. The nameplate became her talisman, a physical connection to the boat's mysterious past. She kept it in her pocket as she worked, occasionally taking it out to run her thumb over the engraved letters, wondering about Captain Reynolds and the story behind his boat. The days slipped by. The bank's deadline loomed closer. Emily worked with a feverish intensity, knowing she wouldn't finish in time, but unable to stop trying. The Nighthawk began to take shape under her careful hands, not restored yet, but no longer on the verge of collapse. She'd replaced the worst sections of the hull, stabilized the keel, and begun the painstaking process of restoring the transom to its original specifications. Each night she fell into bed too exhausted to worry about the future, only to wake a few hours later with new ideas and renewed determination. She was living on coffee and peanut butter sandwiches, her savings dwindling with each specialized part she needed to order. With just 10 days left before she would be forced to leave the shop, Emily made a difficult decision. She would sell her grandfather's pocket watch, the last family heirloom she'd been holding on to. The antique gold timepiece would fetch enough to buy the marine engine parts she needed and maybe pay for a small storage space to continue working on the Nighthawk after she lost the shop. The morning she planned to take the watch to the jeweler in Portland, Emily arrived at the shop just after dawn to find the door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open slowly. Had someone broken in? There wasn't much left to steal besides her tools, but those would be devastating to lose now. The sound reached her before anything else. Heavy footsteps moving slowly across the concrete floor. Not trying to be quiet, not hiding. Emily grabbed a wrench from her belt and stepped into the dim workshop. The footsteps stopped. In the gray morning light filtering through the dusty windows, she could make out a figure standing next to the Nighthawk. Tall, straight back despite his obvious age. A man in his 70s with a military bearing that time hadn't diminished. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, wrench still raised. "What are you doing in my shop?" The man turned slowly. His face was weathered, lined with age and experience, but his eyes, a startling blue, were sharp and clear beneath bushy white eyebrows. He wore a simple navy blue jacket over a plaid shirt, work pants, and boots polished to a shine that seemed at odds with their obvious age. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "The door was unlocked. I saw her through the window and—" He gestured to the boat, his hand trembling slightly. "I had to see if it was really her." Emily lowered the wrench slightly but remained wary. "See if what was her?" The man stepped closer to the boat, placing one gnarled hand on the hull with a gentleness that seemed almost reverent. "The Nighthawk." His voice caught on the name. "I never thought I'd see her again." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "You know this boat?" The man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the partially restored vessel. I served on her. Korea 51 to 53. He turned to face Emily, extending his hand. "Samuel Reynolds, Captain, United States Navy, retired." Emily's fingers automatically went to the nameplate in her pocket. "Captain Reynolds," she repeated, too stunned to say more. She took his offered hand. "Emily Carter." "You're restoring her," he said, looking back at the boat. It wasn't a question. "Trying to," Emily admitted, "though I'm running out of time and money faster than I'm making progress." Reynolds nodded, continuing his careful examination of the work she'd done. His inspection was methodical, professional, the assessment of someone who knew boats intimately. After several minutes, he straightened and looked at Emily with newfound respect. "You know what you're doing. That's rare these days, especially with wooden hulls like this. My grandfather taught me, and my father after him." "Carter," he said thoughtfully. "Would that be William Carter's place? He was the best wooden boatman on this coast back in my day." "My grandfather," Emily confirmed with a small smile. "This was his shop." Reynolds nodded as if this explained something important. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the boat. Emily nodded, and the old captain carefully climbed aboard the Nighthawk, moving with the deliberate certainty of someone returning to familiar territory. He ran his hands along the gunnels, the transom, the rebuilt sections of the hull. Then, to Emily's shock, the old man's composure cracked. His shoulders began to shake, and tears slid down his weathered cheeks. "Nighthawk," he whispered, voice breaking. "Is it really you, old girl?" Emily stood frozen, witnessing a reunion she couldn't fully comprehend. This wasn't just a man who recognized a boat from his past. This was something deeper, a connection forged through experiences she could only imagine. After a moment, Reynolds collected himself and carefully exited the boat. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his eyes without embarrassment or apology. "I never thought I'd see her again," he said quietly. "They told us she was scuttled after our unit was disbanded, 50 yards offshore in 80 feet of water. That's what the official report said." He shook his head. "I should have known better. The Nighthawk was too stubborn to stay sunk." Emily hesitated, then pulled the nameplate from her pocket. "I found this," she said, holding it out to him. hidden in a compartment in the hull. Reynolds took the brass plate, his fingers tracing the engraved letters of his own name. "Matthew made this," he said softly. "Matthew Parker, our corpsman. He had a way with metals, could make something out of nothing." He flipped it over, reading the scratched message on the back. A sad smile crossed his face. That sounds like him. Emily's mind was spinning with questions. "Captain Reynolds." "Sam," he corrected. "I haven't been Captain Reynolds in a very long time." "Sam," Emily amended. "What exactly was the Nighthawk? I couldn't find any record of her in naval registries or Korean War archives." Sam glanced up sharply. "You wouldn't. She wasn't the kind of boat that made it into official records. At least, not the real records." He looked back at the vessel. The Nighthawk was part of a special operations unit, coastal insertion, reconnaissance, extraction of personnel from behind enemy lines. The kind of missions that didn't exist on paper. He walked slowly around the boat, continuing his inspection. She was built for speed and stealth. Wooden hull to minimize radar signature. Special mufflers on the engines to reduce noise. Black paint to blend with the night waters. He tapped a specific spot on the hull. Hidden compartments for medical supplies, ammunition, radio equipment. Emily followed him, absorbing every detail. "And you were her captain?" Sam nodded. "For 2 years, we ran 57 missions along the North Korean coast, delivered intelligence that saved thousands of lives, extracted 23 downed pilots and 14 stranded reconnaissance teams." His voice dropped. "Lost 3 good men in the process." Emily watched the emotions play across his face. Pride, grief, nostalgia. "What happened to her? How did she end up drifting off the Maine coast decades later?" Sam shook his head. "That's what I'd like to know. Last I saw the Nighthawk was July 1953, just before the armistice. Our unit was being disbanded. We were ordered to scuttle her. Too many secrets built into her design to risk her falling into the wrong hands." His brow furrowed. "I watched them tow her out and sink her, or so I thought." He looked around the shop, taking in the foreclosure notices Emily hadn't bothered to hide. "You said you were running out of time?" Emily nodded grimly. "Bank's taking the place in 10 days. I'm behind on the mortgage and business has been slow for years. Everyone wants fiberglass now, not wooden boats." "Where will you go? What about the Nighthawk?" Emily sighed. "I'll find a place to rent, I guess. As for the boat," she gestured helplessly. "I'm trying to find somewhere to store her, to keep working on her. I can't just abandon her now." Sam studied her face intently. "Why this boat? You're clearly skilled. You could have put your time and money into something with better prospects for return." Emily considered the question. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "Something about her called to me. She deserved better than to rot away in a salvage yard. And I needed—" She struggled to find the words. "I needed something to save, I guess, even if I couldn't save my shop or my family's legacy." Sam nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "The Nighthawk has always had a way of finding the people who need her most." He straightened his shoulders, decision made. "I have some experience with wooden boats myself, and I find myself with time on my hands these days. Perhaps we could work together on her restoration." Emily blinked in surprise. "You want to help restore the Nighthawk?" "More than that," Sam said firmly. "I want to help you finish what you've started. This boat?" He placed his hand on the hull again. "This boat saved my life more times than I can count. She brought my men home when nothing else could. I owe her this much." He met Emily's gaze, and in his clear blue eyes, she saw determination that matched her own. "Chien tran komchi lady sin mang, nakon lady ka kiuk. Vadoiki kiuk latu kwizia nyut chungtakaban." "War doesn't just take lives," Emily translated softly. "It takes memories too. And sometimes memories are the most precious things we have." Sam looked at her in surprise. "You speak Vietnamese?" "My father was stationed there after Korea. He learned the language, taught me some phrases growing up." She smiled slightly. That was one of his favorites. A connection formed between them in that moment. A bridge across generations built on shared understanding and respect. Emily felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, just a fraction. She wasn't alone in this impossible task anymore. I'd welcome the help, she said simply, and I think the Nighthawk would too. Sam nodded, a hint of a smile crossing his weathered face. Then let's get to work. We have a boat to save and not much time to do it. As they began planning the next steps of the restoration, Sam told Emily more about the Nighthawk's history. He spoke of dangerous missions in hostile waters, of the tight-knit crew who had become like family, and most of all of Matthew Parker, the young corpsman who had saved so many lives. Matt wasn't supposed to be there at all, Sam explained as they carefully removed damaged planking. He was a Navy hospital corpsman assigned to a MASH unit, but during a particularly bad push by the North Koreans, their position was overrun. Matt escaped with 12 wounded men, led them through 15 miles of enemy territory to the coast where we were running an extraction, got every single one of them out alive. Sam's hands worked steadily as he spoke, his muscle memory for boat repair clearly intact despite the decades. Command saw something in him after that, assigned him to our unit permanently. Best decision they ever made. That boy could patch up wounds that would make seasoned surgeons faint, all while under fire in a boat bouncing through 6-foot swells. Emily listened, fascinated, as Sam painted a picture of a young man with steady hands and unshakable courage. Matthew Parker became real to her through Sam's stories. His quiet competence, his dry humor, his habit of humming big band tunes during the most dangerous moments of a mission. He saved my life twice, Sam said, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a long scar running from elbow to wrist. Shrapnel from a shore battery caught me during an extraction near Wonson. Matt stitched me up while we were racing back to international waters with gunboats on our tail. Never even flinched when a bullet splintered the hull inches from his head. As the day turned to evening, Sam reluctantly prepared to leave. I'm staying at the Harborview Inn, he told Emily. I'll be back tomorrow at 0700. We have a lot of work to do if we're going to get her in decent shape before your deadline. Emily walked him to the door. Why are you really helping me, Sam? You don't even know me. The old captain paused, looking back at the partially restored Nighthawk gleaming in the workshop lights. Because some debts can never be fully repaid, he said quietly. And because that boat represents the best men I ever knew. Men who didn't come home. He met her gaze steadily. Matthew Parker saved 12 wounded soldiers, 2 downed pilots, and every member of our crew at least once. He's the reason I lived to see my daughter born, the reason I got to hold my wife again. Sam's voice grew husky with emotion. Matthew didn't make it home. The least I can do is help save the boat he loved. After Sam left, Emily remained in the workshop, processing everything she'd learned. The Nighthawk wasn't just a boat anymore. It was a vessel of memories, of sacrifice, of lives saved and lost. It carried the weight of history in every timber, every curve of its hull. She ran her hand along the nameplate that Sam had insisted she keep. What really happened to you, Matthew Parker? She whispered into the quiet shop. And why did the Nighthawk survive when they tried to sink her? The boat, as always, kept its secrets. But for the first time since she'd begun this seemingly impossible project, Emily felt she might be exactly where she was meant to be. Dawn broke over Harborview, painting the small harbor in hues of pink and gold. Emily sat on the weathered dock outside her shop, a chipped mug of steaming coffee warming her hands against the early morning chill. Beside her, Sam Reynolds mirrored her posture, his own mug raised occasionally to his lips as they watched the fishing boats heading out for the day's catch. They had been working on the Nighthawk for 3 days now, establishing a rhythm that felt as natural as if they'd been restoring boats together for years. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that forms between people united by purpose rather than circumstance. Best time of day, Sam said finally, nodding toward the horizon where the sun continued its ascent. Out on the water, dawn was always when you could breathe again. Made it through another night. New day ahead. Emily nodded, understanding. In the soft morning light, the worries that kept her awake at night seemed less overwhelming. The bank notices, the dwindling time, the mountain of work still ahead, all receded just a little with the promise of a new day. My grandfather used to say sunrise belongs to people who work with their hands, she said. Everyone else just sleeps through the best part of the day. Sam chuckled. Smart man, your grandfather. He finished his coffee and stood, joints creaking audibly. Speaking of work, we've got plenty waiting for us. Inside the workshop, the Nighthawk sat in cradles Emily had constructed, her hull now stripped to bare wood in most sections. The work they'd completed in just 3 days was substantial. All the rotted planking removed, the cracked keel reinforced with a sister piece of oak, and the transom framework rebuilt to original specifications. Sam ran his hand along the newly exposed interior framing. "Today we start the real restoration," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "You've got that white oak seasoned yet?" Emily nodded, leading him to where she'd carefully stacked the replacement planking she'd ordered. "Been steam treating it in sections each night. First batch should be ready." Sam examined the wood with an expert's eye. Good grain, not quite like the old growth stuff they used originally, but solid. He picked up a plank, testing its flexibility. "You know the traditional method for treating naval oak?" Emily shook her head. "My grandfather always used steam and clamps." "That works for most applications," Sam acknowledged. "But for military vessels like the Nighthawk, we used a salt curing process first. Makes the wood more resistant to water damage and helps it take to steam bending better." He guided her through the process, creating a brine solution of exact proportions, soaking the planks for precisely timed intervals, then applying heat in a specific pattern. It was meticulous work, the kind of knowledge that wasn't found in books, but passed from shipwright to shipwright over generations. "Where did you learn all this?" Emily asked as they prepared the first section for installation. "Naval Shipyard in Boston before Korea," Sam replied, carefully measuring and marking the plank. "Apprenticed under a master shipwright who'd been building wooden vessels since before the First World War. Man could smell when a piece of oak was ready to bend, I swear." They worked steadily through the morning, Sam teaching and Emily absorbing every detail. His knowledge of traditional shipbuilding techniques was comprehensive, but it was his intimate familiarity with the Nighthawk herself that proved most valuable. He remembered every curve, every angle, every unique feature of her design. "She wasn't built in a regular shipyard," he explained, as they fitted the first replacement plank. "Too many secrets in her construction. Small team of naval engineers and craftsmen put her together at a classified facility. Only 6 boats like her were ever made." Emily secured the plank with temporary fasteners while Sam prepared the next section. "What happened to the others?" "2 were lost in combat operations. One caught fire during a fueling accident. The other 2 were definitely scuttled after the armistice." He tapped the hull of the Nighthawk. "This girl was supposed to join them. Still don't understand how she survived." The sharp ring of the telephone cut through their conversation. Emily wiped her hands on a rag and crossed the workshop to answer it, already knowing who it would be. The bank representative's voice was professionally sympathetic but unyielding. The foreclosure date remained firm. They could offer a 30-day extension, but only if Emily made a good faith payment of $5,000 immediately. Money she simply didn't have. She thanked the woman, keeping her voice steady, and hung up. When she turned back to the boat, Sam was watching her, his expression concerned but tactful enough not to ask. 30 days, Emily said anyway, returning to their work. "If I can come up with $5,000 I don't have." Sam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We'll figure something out," he said simply, and returned to the careful process of shaping the next plank. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of tools against wood and the occasional gulls crying outside. Emily lost herself in the rhythm of the work, the familiar patterns of measuring, cutting, and fitting. This at least she knew how to do. This made sense in a world where little else did. By mid-afternoon, they had completed the first section of replacement planking on the port side. The fresh white oak gleamed against the weathered original wood, a visual testament to the Nighthawk's rebirth. "Time to check the keel reinforcement," Sam said, pointing to the interior. "Need to make sure those sister pieces are setting properly before we move on." Emily nodded and began removing sections of the temporary flooring they'd installed to access the keel. The sound of metal scraping against metal rang out as she pried up a particularly stubborn panel. "Wait," Sam said suddenly, holding up his hand. "Hear that?" Emily paused. "The scraping?" "No, the tone after. That's not wood on metal." He knelt beside her, examining the section she'd been working on. "There's something under there, something that doesn't belong." Together, they carefully removed the remaining panels, exposing a section of the keel they hadn't yet examined closely. What they found made them both sit back on their heels in surprise. Seamlessly integrated into the keel structure was a small metal compartment, so cunningly designed that it appeared to be part of the boat's support system. It had been painted the same color as the surrounding wood, making it nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. "I never knew this was here," Sam whispered, running his fingers along the edges of the compartment. "And I thought I knew every inch of this boat." The compartment had no visible latch or opening mechanism. Sam studied it for a moment, then pressed a specific spot while simultaneously pushing against another section. With a soft click, a panel slid open. Inside was a metal box, approximately 8 inches square, sealed with some kind of naval-grade waterproofing. Despite decades in the boat, it appeared untouched by time or water. Emily looked at Sam. "Should we open it?" Sam hesitated, his expression conflicted. "It's been sealed for over 70 years. Could be classified materials in there. Or it could be something personal," Emily countered. "Something Matthew left behind." Sam nodded slowly. If it was official documentation, it would have had proper naval markings. He gestured for Emily to proceed. "You found her. You should do the honors." With careful hands, Emily broke the seal on the box. The lid opened with surprising ease, revealing contents protected by a layer of oilcloth. She unwrapped it gently to find 3 items: a leather-bound notebook with Monsieur Parker, USN, stamped on the cover, a set of military dog tags on a chain, and a folded piece of paper that appeared to be a map. "Matthew's journal," Sam said softly, touching the notebook with reverent fingers. "And his tags. He never went anywhere without that notebook. Said it was his insurance that somebody would know what happened if he didn't make it back." Emily handed the items to Sam, watching as emotion played across his weathered face. He opened the notebook carefully, the pages crackling slightly with age but still intact and legible. Inside was neat, precise handwriting, medical notes, coordinates, patient records, and personal observations. "His handwriting," Sam murmured, a slight tremor in his voice. "Just like I remember." As Sam began reading through the journal, Emily unfolded the map. It was a detailed nautical chart of a coastline she didn't immediately recognize, with handwritten notations in several locations marked with precise coordinates. "Sam," she said, pointing to the map, "what is this?" He looked up from the journal, eyes widening as he saw the chart. "That's the northeastern coast of North Korea. Those markings." He leaned closer, studying the notations. "Those are our extraction points, safe harbors, enemy patrol patterns." He shook his head in disbelief. "This is highly classified information, or at least it was back then." Emily pointed to a specific location that had been circled repeatedly in red ink. "And this?" Sam's expression darkened. "That's where we lost the Parker brothers, James and William. No relation to Matthew. They were our radio man and gunner, ambushed during an extraction of a downed pilot." He closed his eyes briefly. "Bad night. Very bad night." Emily looked from the map to the journal and back to Sam. "Do you think we should report this to someone? The Navy, maybe? This could still be classified material." Sam considered the question, his military training clearly at odds with his personal feelings. After 70 years, most Korean War operations have been declassified. But these special operations, he sighed, the right thing to do would be to contact naval intelligence. "But," Emily prompted, sensing his hesitation. "But Matthew obviously wanted this preserved, not locked away in some government archive. He went to extraordinary lengths to hide it, where only someone restoring the Nighthawk would find it." Sam ran his fingers along the edge of the journal. "This is history that deserves to be remembered, not buried." Emily nodded, understanding the dilemma. "What if we review everything first? If there's anything that could still compromise national security, we contact the authorities. Otherwise, we preserve Matthew's legacy the way he intended." Sam considered this compromise. "That seems reasonable, but we'll need to be careful. Some things are classified for good reason." They spent the rest of the afternoon and well into the evening poring over Matthew's journal. It was a remarkable document, part medical log, part ship's diary, part personal reflection. Matthew had recorded every mission, every injury treated, every life saved or lost with meticulous detail, but also deep humanity. "Listen to this entry," Sam said, reading aloud. April 12, 1952. Lieutenant Reynolds took shrapnel to right forearm during extraction under fire. Wound deep but clean. Removed 23 fragments, sutured in layers despite heavy seas. Patient refused morphine to maintain command. Man has the pain tolerance of a bull moose and twice the stubbornness. Sam chuckled. He had me pegged. As they read deeper into the journal, a clearer picture emerged of the Nighthawk's final mission, one that Sam himself had never fully understood. This is dated July 26, 1953, just days before the armistice, Sam said, his voice growing tense. I remember this mission. We were sent to extract a high-value intelligence asset from a cove near Wonson. He continued reading, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Mission parameters changed at 0300. Colonel Blackwell radioed new orders directly to Captain Reynolds. Asset extraction aborted. New mission. Deliver medical supplies to friendly guerrilla unit operating 10 kilometers inland. Sam looked up, confusion in his eyes. I never received such orders. We completed the extraction as planned and returned to base. Emily leaned forward. Could Matthew have been mistaken? No. Sam shook his head firmly. Matthew's records were always precise. If he wrote it down, it happened. He turned the page, continuing to read. Captain unaware of mission change. Blackwell ordered radio silence and direct implementation. Supplies delivered to designated coordinates at 0430. No contact with guerrilla unit. Possible compromise. Sam's hands began to shake slightly. He was running a separate operation without my knowledge. Using my boat, my crew. Emily placed her hand on his arm, steadying him. Keep reading. The next entries revealed a story that had never made it into any official record. Matthew, acting on direct orders from Colonel Blackwell, had been conducting covert medical supply deliveries to North Korean civilians in areas controlled by guerrilla forces, allegedly friendly to American interests. These missions were concealed even from the Nighthawk's captain and crew. July 27, 1953, Sam read, his voice barely above a whisper. Final mission compromised. Medical supplies contain tracking devices. Guerrilla unit captured. Nighthawk's involvement must be concealed. Blackwell orders boats scuttled with all evidence. Cannot allow Captain Reynolds or crew to be implicated. The final entry was dated July 28, 1953, the day the Nighthawk supposedly sank. Have disabled tracking devices in remaining supplies. Will remain with boat during scuttling operation to ensure evidence is destroyed. Crew evacuated under pretense of routine maintenance. Captain Reynolds ordered to debriefing at headquarters. Forgive me, Sam, some orders cannot be refused, but I will protect this crew with my life. If by some miracle these words are found, know that I made my choice freely. The Nighthawk deserves better than to die in disgrace. Sam lowered the journal, his face ashen. He stayed aboard. When they towed her out to sink her, Matthew was still on the boat. His voice broke. All these years I thought he'd been reassigned. They told us he was transferred to a MASH unit in the final days of the fighting, that he died in a mortar attack after the armistice. Emily felt a chill run through her. But if he went down with the boat, how did the Nighthawk survive? And how did Matthew's journal end up hidden inside her? Before Sam could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel outside the workshop. A car door slammed, followed by purposeful footsteps approaching the entrance. Emily looked at Sam questioningly. Are you expecting someone? Sam shook his head, quickly gathering Matthew's journal and dog tags. Hide these, he whispered urgently, handing them to Emily. She tucked them into her tool cabinet just as the workshop door swung open. The man who entered moved with the confident ease of someone accustomed to ownership. Tall, well-built, despite being in his early 60s, he wore an expensive suit that seemed deliberately casual, yet probably cost more than Emily's truck. His silver hair was expertly cut, his tanned face suggesting time spent on yachts rather than fishing boats. Miss Carter? He inquired, though it wasn't really a question. His assessing gaze took in the workshop, the boat, and finally Sam, lingering there with a flicker of something unreadable. Emily stepped forward. That's me. We're closed for the day. The man smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. Richard Blackwell. I apologize for the late visit, but I've just flown in from Boston specifically to see you. He extended his hand, which Emily reluctantly shook. Or more precisely, to see that boat. The name hit both Emily and Sam like a physical blow. Blackwell, the same name as the colonel in Matthew's journal. Emily felt Sam stiffen beside her. "What's your interest in the Nighthawk?" Sam asked, his voice carefully neutral. Blackwell's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know what she is. Interesting." He moved closer to the boat, examining their restoration work with an expert's eye. "I'm a collector of military artifacts, particularly naval vessels from the Korean and Vietnam conflicts. When I heard rumors of a PT-class boat being restored in Maine, I had to see for myself." He ran his hand along the fresh planking they'd installed that day. "Beautiful work. You clearly know what you're doing, Ms. Carter." "Thank you," Emily replied cautiously. "But the Nighthawk isn't for sale, if that's why you're here." Blackwell's smile widened. "Everything has a price. I understand you're in some financial difficulty." He gestured around the workshop. "Foreclosure can be a messy business." Emily felt her cheeks flush. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know things, Miss Carter. It's served me well." He withdrew a checkbook from his jacket pocket. "I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for the Nighthawk, as is. That would solve your immediate problems and leave you with a tidy sum besides." The amount momentarily took Emily's breath away. $50,000. More than enough to save the shop, pay off her debts, and still have operating capital left over. Her entire financial nightmare solved with a signature. She glanced at Sam, whose face had gone rigid, eyes fixed on Blackwell with barely concealed hostility. "That's very generous," Emily said carefully. "But as I said, she's not for sale." Blackwell seemed more amused than disappointed. "I admire your principles, Ms. Carter, but be practical. This boat, while historically interesting, will cost you far more to restore than you'll ever recoup. And from what I understand, your time here is running out." "Some things aren't about money, Mr. Blackwell," Emily replied. "The Nighthawk has historical significance that can't be measured in dollars." "History isn't for sale," Sam added, speaking for the first time since Blackwell had entered. "It's meant to be preserved and shared." Blackwell turned his attention fully to Sam, studying him with new interest. "You seem familiar with this vessel, Mr. Reynolds." "Captain Samuel Reynolds, United States Navy, retired." A flash of recognition crossed Blackwell's face, quickly masked. "Reynolds, of course! You commanded this boat, didn't you? During the Korean conflict." Sam nodded once, his posture military straight. "I did." "Then you knew Matthew Parker." The name dropped like a stone into still water. Emily saw Sam's hands clench at his sides. "How do you know that name?" Sam demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Blackwell's smile turned thin. "As I said, I'm a collector. I research my acquisitions thoroughly. Matthew Parker was this boat's corpsman. Went missing in the final days of the war, if I recall correctly." "He didn't go missing," Sam said, taking a step forward. "He was betrayed." Blackwell's expression hardened slightly. "Careful, Captain. Wars are complicated affairs. Not everything is as black and white as we might wish." "It seems pretty black and white to me," Sam countered. "Your father used Matthew for his own purposes, then left him to die when things went wrong." Emily's eyes widened at Sam's direct accusation. Blackwell's facade of polite interest vanished, replaced by a cold calculation. "My father was following orders, Captain. Just as you did. Just as Parker did." He straightened his already impeccable suit. "The fact that you know this much tells me you found something in this boat. Something that should have stayed lost." "Like the truth?" Sam took another step forward, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "Like the fact that your father used my boat and my corpsman for illegal operations, then tried to sink them both to cover his tracks?" Blackwell's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "My father was a patriot who did what was necessary in a complicated war. The historical record reflects that, and that's how it should remain." "The historical record is a lie," Sam said, his voice rising. "Matthew Parker didn't die in a mortar attack. He went down with this boat to protect his crew from your father's schemes." "And yet here the boat is," Blackwell observed coldly. "Which means Parker survived as well. Where is he now, I wonder? And more importantly, where is whatever you found in this boat?" Emily moved to stand beside Sam, feeling the tension radiating from him. "I think you should leave, Mr. Blackwell. I don't think you understand your position, Miss Carter. Blackwell's voice remained perfectly controlled. That boat contains classified materials that are still property of the United States government. I could have federal agents here within hours. Then why offer me money instead of calling them already? Emily challenged, a thin smile. Let's call it professional courtesy and family interest. My father's reputation is part of my legacy. I prefer to handle this quietly. By buying and burying the evidence, Sam said flatly. By preserving history as it should be remembered, Blackwell countered. One every truth serves the greater good, Captain. Surely your military career taught you that. Sam's face flushed with anger. What I learned in my career is that men like your father sacrifice others to protect themselves. Matthew Parker was worth 10 of him. He saved lives while your father destroyed them. Blackwell's composure finally cracked. You don't know what you're talking about, old man. My father made the hard choices so men like you could play hero. Your father was a coward, Sam shouted, stepping toward Blackwell. He sent good men to Dame, then covered it up to save his own career. The sudden change in Sam was alarming. His face had gone from flushed to alarmingly pale, and his left arm hung awkwardly at his side. Emily noticed with horror that his speech was beginning to slur. Sam, she said urgently, grabbing his arm. Sam, are you okay? He turned to her, confusion crossing his face. I don't, he began, but the words died as his legs buckled beneath him. Emily caught him as he collapsed, easing him to the floor. Sam, stay with me. His eyes rolled back, his breathing becoming labored. Emily looked up at Blackwell, who stood watching with what appeared to be genuine shock. Don't just stand there, she shouted. Call 911. To his credit, Blackwell responded immediately, pulling out his phone and making the call. Emily cradled Sam's head, checking his pulse, rapid and irregular. Stroke or heart attack, she said more to herself than to Blackwell. Come on, Sam, stay with me. The minutes until the ambulance arrived felt like hours. Emily stayed with Sam, talking to him continuously even though he remained unresponsive. When the paramedics finally burst through the door, she rattled off the information they needed. His age, his apparent symptoms, his medical history as far as she knew it. As they loaded Sam onto a stretcher, his eyes fluttered open briefly, finding Emily's face. The journal, he whispered. So faintly she almost missed it. Trust no one. Then he was gone, whisked away in a wail of sirens. Emily stood in the suddenly empty workshop, arms wrapped around herself, the echo of the ambulance siren still ringing in her ears. She had almost forgotten Blackwell's presence until he spoke from behind her. I'm truly sorry about Captain Reynolds, he said, and he sounded sincere. That was never my intention. Emily turned to face him, anger replacing her fear. Get out, now! Blackwell held up his hands in a placating gesture. Ms. Carter, regardless of our disagreement, you need to understand what you've stumbled into. There are aspects of this situation that go beyond a simple boat restoration. I said, get out. Emily's voice was steady, her gaze unflinching. Blackwell sighed, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a business card. He placed it on the workbench. My offer stands, $50,000. Think about it. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I'll check on Captain Reynolds at the hospital. Despite what you might think, I respect his service. With that, he was gone, the purr of an expensive engine soon fading into the distance. Emily stood motionless for several minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. Then, galvanized by a sudden urgency, she retrieved Matthew's journal and dog tags from their hiding place. She couldn't leave them in the workshop, not now that Blackwell knew they existed. Securing the items in her bag, Emily locked up the shop and drove straight to Harborview Medical Center. The small regional hospital was the only medical facility for 20 miles, and she knew they would have taken Sam there. In the emergency waiting room, a harried nurse confirmed that Samuel Reynolds had been admitted and was undergoing evaluation. His condition was listed as serious but stable. Are you family? The nurse asked, clearly ready to deny further information if Emily wasn't. His daughter is flying in from Portland, Emily improvised. I'm the closest thing he has to family until she arrives. Whether it was the conviction in her voice or the genuine concern on her face, the nurse relented slightly. The doctor will update family when there's news. You can wait if you'd like. Emily settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair, Matthew's journal burning a hole in her bag. She wanted desperately to continue reading it, to uncover more of the truth, but the busy waiting room was hardly the place for reviewing potentially classified documents. Hours passed, Emily dozed fitfully, waking at every announcement over the hospital intercom. Around 2 a.m., a doctor finally appeared in the waiting room. "Miss Carter? I'm Dr. Lieberman. You're here for Captain Reynolds." Emily nodded, standing quickly. "How is he?" "He's experienced a transient ischemic attack, what we sometimes call a mini-stroke. The good news is there doesn't appear to be permanent damage. He's stable and resting comfortably." The doctor consulted her clipboard. "His daughter has been notified and is on her way, but won't arrive until morning. Since you are listed as his emergency contact, you can see him briefly if you'd like." Emily blinked in surprise. Sam had listed her as his emergency contact? When had he done that? She followed Dr. Lieberman through the quiet quarters to a small private room. Sam lay against white sheets, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she could have imagined. An IV dripped steadily into his arm, and a monitor beeped quietly beside the bed. "He needs rest," the doctor cautioned. "Just a few minutes." Emily nodded her understanding and moved to Sam's bedside once the doctor had left. His eyes were closed, his breathing even. The military bearing that had seemed so intrinsic to him was gone now, replaced by the fragility of age that his personality usually obscured. "Sam," she said softly, not really expecting a response. To her surprise, his eyes opened, finding her face with remarkable clarity for someone who had just suffered a stroke. "Emily," he murmured, his voice weak but coherent. "The journal. Did you bring it?" She nodded, patting her bag. "It's safe. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been torpedoed," he said with a ghost of his usual dry humor. "What did they tell you?" "Mini-stroke, no permanent damage apparently. Your daughter's on her way." A faint smile crossed his face. "Sarah, good girl, worries too much." His expression turned serious. "Blackwell?" "Gone for now. He left his card and his offer." Sam's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't trust him, Emily. Not him, not anyone who comes asking about the Nighthawk." "Matthew's journal." He paused, seeming to gather his strength. "There's more in there than I had time to read. Things that could still matter." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but the patient needs to rest now." Emily squeezed Sam's hand. "I'll come back tomorrow. Don't worry about anything but getting better." Sam held her hand a moment longer. "Read the journal," he whispered urgently. "All of it. Then hide it somewhere safe, not the shop. Blackwell will be back." Emily nodded, then reluctantly let go of his hand as the nurse gave her a pointed look. "I'll take care of everything," she promised. "Just rest." Outside the hospital, the night air was cool and damp with sea mist. Emily sat in her truck for several minutes, exhaustion and worry warring with the need to act. Finally, she started the engine and drove, not back to her apartment above the shop, but to the small 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The Golden Light Diner was a Harborview institution, catering to fishermen heading out before dawn and night owls with nowhere else to go. At 3 a.m., it was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and a waitress who looked as tired as Emily felt. Emily slid into a back booth, ordered coffee, and finally, with wary glances at the few other patrons, opened Matthew's journal. She began where Sam had left off, reading the corpsman's precise account of the Nighthawk's final days. The more she read, the more disturbing the picture became. Colonel Richard Blackwell Sr. had been running unauthorized operations using the Nighthawk as cover, not medical supply deliveries as Matthew had initially believed, but weapons transfers to anti-communist guerrilla forces with questionable loyalties. When one of these groups used American weapons to attack a village housing North Korean civilians, an investigation was launched. Blackwell, facing possible court-martial, had ordered the Nighthawk scuttled to destroy evidence of the operations. Matthew, realizing what was happening, had created a record of everything and hidden it aboard the boat he loved. But the final entries revealed an even more shocking truth. Matthew hadn't gone down with the boat as he'd planned. The journal continued beyond the scuttling date. July 29, 1953, Emily read silently. Nighthawk refused to sink. Charges set by Blackwell's men were insufficient, possibly deliberately so by sympathetic demolition crew. Boat took on water but remained partially afloat. I managed to make emergency repairs after recovery team departed, believing job complete, using night cover and makeshift sail to attempt navigation to neutral waters. The next entries documented Matthew's desperate journey, alone on a damaged boat, trying to reach international waters where he might find rescue. He'd sustained injuries during the failed scuttling attempt, and his medical training told him they were potentially fatal. The final entry was dated August 3rd, 1953. Condition worsening, fever indicates infection spreading. Unlikely to reach friendly forces. Have sealed this record in my tags and waterproof container, secured in Nighthawk's hidden compartment. If found, please inform Captain Samuel Reynolds that it was an honor to serve with him. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't save everyone this time. The Nighthawk deserves to be remembered for her true service, not the lies they'll tell. She never failed her mission. Neither did her crew. Emily closed the journal, tears stinging her eyes. Matthew Parker had died trying to preserve the truth. He had given his life to protect his captain and crewmates from being implicated in Blackwell's illegal operations. But what had happened to the Nighthawk after Matthew's death? How had it survived decades at sea, eventually drifting to the Maine coast? And most importantly, why was Richard Blackwell Jr. so determined to acquire it now, 70 years later? The sunrise found Emily still at the diner, surrounded by coffee cups and notes she'd made about the journal's contents. She had documented every name, date, and location mentioned, creating a timeline of the Nighthawk's missions in Matthew's final days. With renewed purpose, she paid her bill and drove to the Harborview Public Library. It wouldn't open for hours yet, but she needed time to think, to plan her next steps. She parked in the empty lot and reclined her seat, intending to close her eyes for just a few minutes. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky and cars filled the once empty parking lot. Emily checked her watch, 10:23 a.m. She had slept for hours. Grabbing her bag with Matthew's journal, she hurried into the library. The Harborview Public Library was small but proud, occupying a former sea captain's home near the town center. Its local history room was particularly well regarded, containing archives that documented the town's maritime heritage back to its founding in the 1700s. Ms. Abernathy, the head librarian, had known Emily since she was a child, coming in for books on engines and boats when other girls her age were reading about horses and ballet. "Emily Carter, as I live and breathe," the older woman greeted her. "Haven't seen you in here for years." "Hi, Ms. Abernathy. I need some help with research. Korean War naval operations, specifically small craft used for covert missions." The librarian raised an eyebrow. "Quite specific. Any particular reason?" Emily hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "I'm restoring a boat that might have served in Korea, trying to authenticate its history." Ms. Abernathy nodded, clearly intrigued. "We have limited resources on military history here, but I can point you in the right direction. And of course, I can request materials through interlibrary loan if you need something specific." For the next several hours, Emily immersed herself in what little information the small library had on Korean War naval operations. Most official histories mentioned only larger vessels, destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers. Small patrol craft and their missions were barely footnotes. She did find references to PT boat operations along the Korean coast, conducting reconnaissance and occasional raids, but nothing specific about the Nighthawk or 5 sister vessels with similar design. By mid-afternoon, Emily had exhausted the library's resources. She thanked Mrs. Abernathy and was preparing to leave when the librarian called her back. "I just remembered something," she said, disappearing into a back room. She returned moments later with a business card. "The Naval History and Heritage Command has a research center in Washington, D.C. They maintain archives of declassified naval operations. This is the contact information for their research desk." Emily took the card gratefully. "Thanks, Ms. Abernathy." "And Emily," the librarian added, lowering her voice, "if you're looking into classified operations, you might want to try the Freedom of Information Act. It's been 70 years. Most Korean War documents should be declassified by now." With renewed hope, Emily left the library and drove straight to the hospital to check on Sam. She found him sitting up in bed, color returned to his face, engaged in conversation with a woman who could only be his daughter. Sarah Reynolds was in her early 60s with her father's blue eyes and straight-back posture. She stood as Emily entered, extending her hand. "You must be Emily. Dad's told me all about you and the Nighthawk. I'm Sarah." Emily shook her hand, noticing the same firm grip as Sam's. Nice to meet you. How are you feeling, Sam? Ready to get out of here, he grumbled. But they're insisting on keeping me another night for observation. Which you will endure without complaint, Sarah said firmly, though with obvious affection. The doctor says he's doing remarkably well. No lasting damage, thank God. Told you I was too stubborn to be taken down by a little stroke, Sam said, winking at Emily. Sarah checked her watch. I should go call Mom with an update. Dad, behave yourself while I'm gone. She squeezed his hand, nodded to Emily, and left the room. The moment she was gone, Sam's casual demeanor vanished. Did you read it? He asked urgently. The journal? Emily nodded, moving closer to the bed and lowering her voice. All of it. Matthew didn't go down with the boat, Sam. He survived the scuttling attempt and tried to sail to neutral waters. Sam closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this. But he didn't make it. The last entry indicates he was fighting a severe infection from injuries sustained during the scuttling. He knew he wasn't going to survive. Emily hesitated, then added gently, he wanted you to know it was an honor serving with you. A single tear escaped Sam's tightly controlled composure. Damn fool should have let the boat go. Should have saved himself. He was trying to save all of you, you and the crew, from Blackwell's accusations. Sam nodded, wiping the tear away with military efficiency. What else did you find out? Emily shared her limited findings from the library and the suggestion about the Naval History and Heritage Command. I think we need to go to Washington, see what's in those archives. There might be records of what really happened. Blackwell will be watching, Sam warned. If he's as connected as his father was, he'll know if you start making official inquiries. Then we need to be careful. But we can't just give up, Sam. Matthew deserves for the truth to be known. A nurse entered to check Sam's vitals, ending their conversation. Emily promised to return the following day when Sam was discharged and left the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. Driving back to her shop, Emily's mind raced with possibilities. The Nighthawk was more than just a boat now. It was evidence of a 70-year-old cover-up, a silent witness to one man's sacrifice, and possibly the key to restoring the truth about a forgotten chapter of naval history. As she pulled into the shop's parking lot, Emily noticed a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street. It hadn't been there when she left that morning. A chill ran down her spine as she recalled Sam's warning. Blackwell would be watching. With deliberate casualness, Emily entered her shop and went about normal activities, checking on the Nighthawk's restoration progress and organizing tools. All the while, she was acutely aware of Matthew's journal in her bag, its contents now a potential threat to powerful interests. That evening, after closing the shop, Emily made a decision. She couldn't keep the journal in her apartment or the workshop. Both were too vulnerable. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere Blackwell wouldn't think to look. Under cover of darkness, Emily drove to the one place in Harborview she knew she could trust, Old Pete's Bait and Tackle. Pete Henderson had been her father's closest friend, and after her parents' death, he had become a surrogate uncle to Emily. His small fishing supply store had a massive old safe that had survived 3 generations of Hendersons. Pete, now in his 70s but still sharp as a gaff hook, listened without interruption as Emily explained the situation, or at least as much as she felt safe sharing. So you need to store something valuable in private, he summarized when she finished, and you can't tell me exactly what it is or why. Emily nodded, relieved that he didn't press for details. Just for a little while until I figure things out. Pete studied her face, then nodded once. Your daddy would have done the same for me. Safes in the back office. Combinations your father's birthday. Figured you should know it anyway. Emily hugged the old man fiercely. Thank you, Pete. I'll explain everything someday, I promise. See that you live long enough to do that? Pete replied gruffly. Whatever you're mixed up in, girl, be careful. Your daddy and granddaddy would haunt me forever if I let anything happen to you. After securing Matthew's journal and in Pete's ancient safe, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The precious document was protected, at least temporarily. Now she could focus on uncovering the rest of the Nighthawk's secrets and keeping her promise to both Matthew Parker and Sam Reynolds. The next morning, Emily drove to the hospital to pick up Sam, who had been cleared for discharge. Sarah had arranged for her father to stay with her at the local inn where she'd booked a room rather than returning to his own hotel. Dad tells me you're quite the naval historian now, Sarah remarked as they helped Sam into Emily's truck. Emily exchanged a glance with Sam. Just trying to do justice to the Nighthawk story. Well, I'm grateful he's found this project, Sarah said warmly. He's been too isolated since Mom passed. This is the most animated I've seen him in years, stroke notwithstanding. At the inn, Emily helped Sam get settled, then spread out the notes she'd made based on Matthew's journal. Sarah, sensing they had matters to discuss, tactfully mentioned errands she needed to run in town. Once alone, Sam reviewed Emily's notes with a military strategist's eye. You've done good work here, better than most intelligence officers I knew. Thanks, I think, Emily replied with a small smile. The question is, what do we do with this information? Blackwell clearly wants to bury it, and he has resources we don't. Sam considered this. We need leverage, and we need to understand what's still at stake after all these years. He tapped a specific notation in Emily's timeline. These weapon transfers Blackwell's father was orchestrating, they weren't standard issue. Matthew describes them as non-regulation arms of unknown origin. Emily frowned. What does that mean? It means they weren't U.S. military weapons. Blackwell was running his own private operation, possibly selling arms from unknown sources to these guerrilla groups. Sam's expression darkened. That would have been highly illegal, even in wartime. If evidence of that came to light now, it could still damage his family's reputation, Emily finished. Blackwell Jr. has made a career collecting military memorabilia, presenting himself as a patriotic preservationist of naval history. And his father as a war hero, Sam added. The Blackwell Foundation funds military memorials across the country. The family name is synonymous with naval tradition and honor. Emily leaned back, understanding dawning. So it's not just about classified information. It's about protecting a legacy built on lies. A very valuable legacy, Sam confirmed. The Blackwell military collection is worth millions. The foundation manages endowments for veterans' causes. If it came out that the family fortune was built on illegal arms dealing, it would all collapse, Emily concluded. But we still need proof beyond Matthew's journal, something that would stand up to scrutiny if Blackwell challenges us. Sam nodded thoughtfully. The Nighthawk herself might contain that proof. He pointed to a specific entry in Matthew's notes. Here, he mentions hiding documentation in a secondary compartment, disguised as medical storage. We found the first compartment, but there might be more. Emily's eyes widened. The special structure I noticed when examining the keel reinforcement, there was an unusual configuration near the medical station. The Nighthawk had several hidden compartments, Sam confirmed. Some I knew about, others apparently only Matthew was aware of. Naval intelligence designed her that way, compartmentalized knowledge for security. A plan began to form in Emily's mind. We need to get back to the shop, examine every inch of that boat. If Matthew hid additional evidence, it would be our best leverage against Blackwell, Sam finished. But we need to move quickly. I doubt he's given up. Emily helped Sam to his feet. Despite the doctor's orders to rest, it was clear that the old captain had no intention of staying sidelined while the Nighthawk's fate hung in the balance. Are you sure you're up for this? Emily asked, concerned by his still pale complexion. Sam straightened, summoning the military bearing that seemed as much a part of him as his blue eyes. Matthew Parker didn't give up when facing death alone on that boat. I won't dishonor his memory by giving up now. Together they left to continue their search for a truth that had waited 70 years to be discovered. A truth that might finally bring justice to a forgotten hero and the boat that refused to sink. The knock came just after dawn, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the empty workshop. Emily startled awake, momentarily disoriented. She had fallen asleep at her workbench, Matthew's dog tag still clutched in her hand, the imprint of the metal pressed into her palm. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Emily tucked the tags into her pocket and moved cautiously to the door. After Blackwell's visit and Sam's collapse, she wasn't taking any chances. Through the small window, she could make out a figure silhouetted against the pink-gold light of sunrise. "Who is it?" she called. "Maggie Walsh, Harborview Gazette," came the reply. "Looking for Emily Carter." Emily hesitated, then unlatched the door. Maggie Walsh was indeed a reporter for the local weekly newspaper, though Emily knew her primarily as a customer who occasionally brought in her father's old outboard motor for servicing. "Kind of early for an interview, Maggie," Emily said, opening the door just enough to lean against the frame, blocking entry. Maggie was in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a notepad already in hand. Early bird gets the worm, or in this case, the story. She peered past Emily at the Nighthawk. "Word around town is, you've got something special in there. A warboat with history." Emily's exhaustion-fogged brain tried to process this development. "Who told you that?" "Small town," Maggie shrugged. "People talk, especially when there's a rich collector nosing around offering money for an old boat." She fixed Emily with a direct look. "And especially when Sam Reynolds is involved. Local boy makes good, becomes a war hero, then returns after decades to help save a mysterious boat? That's front page, Emily." Emily sighed and stepped back, allowing Maggie to enter. There was no point in secrecy now. Blackwell knew about the Nighthawk, which meant others soon would too. "It's not just any boat," Emily admitted, closing the door behind them. "It's the USS Nighthawk, Korean War Patrol vessel, special operations." Maggie whistled softly as she approached the partially restored boat. "She's beautiful. What's her story?" Emily considered how much to share. The reporter might be useful. Public attention could make it harder for Blackwell to simply take the Nighthawk. But the full truth about Matthew Parker and Colonel Blackwell's illegal operations was dangerous. "It's complicated," she said finally. "The boat was commanded by Sam Reynolds during the Korean War. It was supposed to have been scuttled after the armistice, but somehow survived. I found it in Mayton's salvage yard and decided to restore it. And the rich guy who wanted us to buy it," Maggie probed, scribbling notes. "Richard Blackwell, military collector from Boston, offered me $50,000 for it." "Which you turned down, then?" "It wasn't a question. Wait till you." Emily moved to the Nighthawk, running her hand along the freshly restored planking. "Because some things aren't for sale. This boat matters. It saved lives. It deserves to be remembered, not locked away in some private collection." Maggie studied Emily's face, sensing there was more to the story. "And Captain Reynolds, how did he find out you had his old boat?" "He saw it through the window," Emily said, sticking close to the truth. "Recognized it immediately." "Must have been quite a reunion," Maggie mused, approaching the boat herself. "Mind if I take some photos?" Emily nodded her consent, watching as Maggie circled the Nighthawk, capturing images from various angles. The morning light filtered through the workshop's dusty windows, casting golden beams across the boat's hull, highlighting the craftsmanship of both its original builders and Emily's restoration work. In that moment of quiet beauty, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever happened with Blackwell, with the bank, with her uncertain future, the Nighthawk deserved to have its story told. Matthew Parker deserved to have his sacrifice remembered. "I heard Captain Reynolds had some kind of medical emergency while the collector was here," Maggie said, breaking the silence. "What happened?" "Mini stroke," Emily replied, not elaborating on the circumstances. "He's recovering well." Maggie finished taking photos and turned back to Emily. "Look, I know there's more to this story than you're telling me. That's your right, but I think whatever's happening here matters to Harborview. Local business about to be foreclosed on, historic boat with ties to a hometown hero, wealthy outsider trying to buy it all up. That's the kind of story people around here care about." She handed Emily a business card. "If you decide you want the full story told, call me. Sometimes sunlight is the best disinfectant." After Maggie left, Emily remained standing in the workshop, the reporter's card in hand. She looked around at the space that had been her family's livelihood for 3 generations, at the tools hanging on the walls, the oil stains on the concrete floor, the half-finished projects waiting for hands that might never return to them. Then her eyes fell on an envelope that had been slipped under the door sometime during the night. The bank's logo was prominently displayed in the corner. Emily tore it open, though she already knew what it contained. The foreclosure notice was official, printed on heavy legal paper with cold, impersonal language. Final date of occupancy, 7 days from today. All property not removed by that date would be considered abandoned and disposed of at the bank's discretion. 7 days. After 3 generations, the Carters had 7 days left in Harborview. Emily pressed her back against the workshop wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. The notice crumpled in her fist. She had known this was coming, had been counting down the days for weeks. But seeing it in black and white, the legal finality of it, made it suddenly painfully real. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, watching the morning sunlight creep across the floor until it reached the Nighthawk. The boat seemed to come alive in the golden light, its newly restored sections gleaming with promise, its weathered parts telling stories of survival against impossible odds. "We're both stubborn, aren't we?" Emily said aloud to the boat, "both refusing to sink when everyone expects us to." The Nighthawk, as always, kept its dignified silence. But in that moment, Emily could almost imagine Matthew Parker standing on its deck, refusing to abandon his post even when all hope seemed lost. With renewed determination, she pushed herself up from the floor. 7 days wasn't much, but it was something. 7 days to find the evidence they needed, to leverage whatever was hidden in the Nighthawk against Blackwell, to ensure Matthew's sacrifice wasn't forgotten. She reached for her phone to call Sam, but before she could dial, it rang in her hand. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. "Emily Carter?" she answered. "Ms. Carter, this is Jim Fletcher from WMR Radio," a cheerful voice responded. "I understand you're restoring a Korean War patrol boat with some fascinating history. We'd love to have you on our morning main program to talk about it." Emily blinked in surprise. "How did you hear about that?" "Maggie Walsh shared some photos on social media. They're getting quite a bit of attention. People love a good historical restoration story, especially with a military angle." After finishing the call with a tentative agreement to do the interview, Emily checked her social media accounts. Sure enough, Maggie had already posted several photos of the Nighthawk, along with a brief teaser about the full story coming in the next edition of the Harborview Gazette. The post had dozens of shares and comments, many from local residents expressing surprise and interest. Several commenters identified themselves as veterans, asking for more information about the boat's history and service. Emily was still scrolling through the comments when the workshop door opened. She looked up, expecting Maggie or perhaps another reporter, but instead found old Pete Henderson standing there, tool belt slung over his shoulder. "Pete, what are you doing here?" The old fisherman shrugged. "Heard you were fixing up a war boat. Figured you could use an extra pair of hands." He stepped inside, eyeing the Nighthawk with professional interest. "Not bad. Needs work on the transom, though." Before Emily could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway. Jack Mercer, who ran the local hardware store and had barely spoken 10 words to Emily in the years since she'd taken over the shop. "Got those brass fittings you'll need," he said without preamble, holding up a paper bag, "and some marine-grade varnish. On the house." Emily stared at him in confusion. "I didn't order any fittings." Jack shrugged. "You will. Can't finish a boat like that without proper hardware." He set the bag on her workbench and moved to examine the Nighthawk more closely. "My father served in Korea. Never talked about it much. This means something, what you're doing." Throughout the morning, more visitors arrived, retired fishermen with shipbuilding experience, a cabinet maker offering to help with interior woodwork, the owner of the local diner bringing coffee and sandwiches for what was quickly becoming an impromptu work crew. By noon, Emily's workshop was filled with a dozen volunteers, all lending their skills to the Nighthawk's restoration. The radio played in the background, and every hour the local station mentioned the historic Korean War vessel being restored in Harborview and encouraged listeners to stop by Carter's Marine Repair to see it for themselves. Emily moved through the organized chaos in a state of disbelief. These were the same townspeople who had been gradually withdrawing their business for years, who had watched silently as her family's legacy slipped toward foreclosure. Yet here they were, rallying around a boat they had no connection to, offering help she had never asked for. "Why back?" she finally asked old Pete as they worked side by side, carefully fitting a new piece of planking. "Why is everyone doing this?" Pete glanced around at the bustling workshop, then back at Emily. "Small towns have long memories, girl. Your grandfather fixed half the boats in this harbor when no one else could. Your father never turned away anyone who needed help, whether they could pay or not." He secured the plank with a temporary fastener. "Carters have been taking care of Harborview for generations. Maybe it's time Harborview returned the favor." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "The bank's given me 7 days. The shop's being foreclosed on." Pete nodded, unsurprised. "We know. News travels fast here." "Then what's the point of all this?" Emily gestured at the restoration work. In a week, I'll have nowhere to keep the Nighthawk anyway. The old fisherman straightened, wincing slightly as his back protested. One problem at a time, Emily. First, we save the boat. Then we figure out the rest. He held her gaze steadily. Sometimes you need to trust more than just yourself. Throughout the afternoon, the impromptu volunteer crew made remarkable progress. With so many skilled hands working together, tasks that would have taken Emily days to complete alone were finished in hours. The Nighthawk's restoration advanced visibly, its transformation accelerating under the combined efforts of the community. Sam arrived mid-afternoon, accompanied by his daughter Sarah. Though still pale and moving with careful deliberation, he insisted on being part of the work. Sarah helped him settle in a chair near the boat, where he could oversee the restoration and provide guidance on historical accuracy. "Never thought I'd see her like this again," he said quietly to Emily as they watched the volunteers work. Surrounded by people who care about her story. Emily nodded, still processing the day's unexpected turn. "I don't understand what's happening, Sam. Yesterday I was alone, about to lose everything. Today you're seeing what community really means," Sam finished for her. "It's not just living in the same place. It's standing together when it matters." As evening approached, Emily addressed the gathered volunteers, thanking them for their unexpected but deeply appreciated help. Many promised to return the next day, bringing additional supplies and recruiting more help. After everyone had gone, leaving Emily alone with Sam and Sarah, the workshop felt strangely empty despite the significant progress on the Nighthawk. The boat now looked less like a restoration project and more like a vessel preparing to return to service. Its structural integrity largely restored, its distinctive lines emerging from beneath years of neglect. "You should get some rest," Sarah told her father. "It's been a long day." Sam nodded reluctantly, the exhaustion evident in his face despite his determination to hide it. "We'll continue tomorrow. Still need to find that second compartment Matthew mentioned." After they left, Emily locked up the workshop and climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment above. She was bone-tired but strangely energized, the day's events playing through her mind as she prepared for bed. Just as she was about to turn off her phone for the night, it rang again. Expecting another reporter, she was surprised to see Maggie Walsh's direct number. "Emily," Maggie said without preamble when she answered, "I've been doing some digging on Richard Blackwell. There's something you should know." Emily sat up suddenly alert. "What is it?" "He's not just interested in your boat. He's bought your mortgage from Atlantic First Bank. As of this afternoon, Blackwell Holdings owns your debt." The news hit Emily like a physical blow. "He can't do that." "He can, and he did," Maggie replied grimly. "Banks sell mortgages all the time, especially troubled ones. Blackwell has effectively become your landlord. And according to my source at the bank, he's planning to accelerate the foreclosure. Could come as soon as tomorrow." "But the notice says I have 7 days," Emily protested. "The new owner can change the terms. It's buried in the fine print of your mortgage agreement." Maggie paused. "Emily, whatever's going on with that boat, Blackwell is playing hardball. Be careful." After hanging up, Emily sat in the darkness of her apartment, turning over this latest development. Blackwell hadn't been bluffing about his resources or determination. By purchasing her mortgage, he had gained control over not just her timeline, but the very ground beneath her feet. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect late summer day in Maine. Emily had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing Matthew's journal again, searching for any clue about the second hidden compartment and the evidence it might contain. She arrived at the workshop early, wanting some time alone with the Nighthawk before the volunteers returned. The boat sat in the golden morning light, patient and dignified despite its still incomplete restoration. Emily ran her hand along the hull, trying to see it through Matthew Parker's eyes. Where would a Navy corpsman hide crucial evidence? What part of the boat would be most accessible to him but least obvious to others? The medical station. It had to be near or within the area that had been Matthew's domain. Sam had pointed it out during their initial inspection. A small designated space near the stern where the corpsman would have stored supplies and treated injuries. Emily climbed carefully into the boat and made her way to that section. Much of the original interior had been damaged beyond repair and removed during the initial stages of restoration. But the basic framework remained, including the structural elements that would have supported the medical station. She examined every inch of the area, tapping gently on surfaces, measuring dimensions, comparing what she found to the specifications Sam had shared from memory. Something wasn't quite right with the bulkhead separating the medical area from the adjacent storage compartment. The dimensions were off by about 3 inches, a discrepancy that might seem insignificant unless you were specifically looking for a hidden space. Emily was carefully prying at the bulkhead when the first volunteers began arriving. Old Pete was among them, bringing coffee and donuts for what he clearly expected to be another community workday. "Making progress, I see," he commented, handing her a steaming cup. Emily nodded, not wanting to share her suspicions about the hidden compartment until she was certain. "Thanks for yesterday, Pete, for everything." The old fisherman waved off her gratitude. "Did you hear the radio this morning? They're talking about nothing but the Nighthawk. Town hasn't been this excited since the summer festival flooded back in '98. Indeed, the workshop soon filled with even more volunteers than the previous day. Word had spread throughout Harborview and neighboring communities, bringing curious visitors and willing helpers alike. Among them were several Korean War veterans who had served in the Navy, eager to see the Nighthawk and share their own stories of service. Emily was introducing one such veteran to Sam when a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. Richard Blackwell stood in the entrance, accompanied by a man in a sheriff's deputy's uniform and another in a business suit. The workshop fell silent as Blackwell surveyed the scene, his expression revealing momentary surprise at the number of people who were present before settling back into calm authority. "Ms. Carter," he said, stepping forward, "I see you've been busy." Emily met his gaze steadily. "What do you want, Blackwell?" He gestured to the man in the suit. "This is Mr. Harris, my attorney, and I believe you know Deputy Collins." He handed Emily a document. "This is a notice of immediate foreclosure on this property. As the new holder of your mortgage, I'm exercising my right to take possession due to your default on payments." Emily skimmed the legal document, her heart sinking despite having been warned by Maggie. "The original notice gave me 7 days. "That was from the bank," Blackwell replied smoothly. "I operate with different timelines. I'll need you and your volunteers to vacate the premises immediately." The workshop erupted in protests. Old Pete stepped forward, placing himself between Emily and Blackwell. "Now you listen here," he growled. "The Carters have been in Harborview longer than your fancy shoes have been in production. You can't just walk in and take what's theirs." Blackwell's expression remained impassive. "I'm afraid the law says otherwise, Mr. Henderson, Pete Henderson. And I've seen men like you come and go, think you can buy anything you want, including people's lives." Deputy Collins looked increasingly uncomfortable as more townspeople joined Pete in forming a protective circle around Emily and the Nighthawk. "I'm simply enforcing a legal contract," Blackwell said, raising his voice to address the crowd. "Ms. Carter borrowed money she couldn't repay. I've purchased that debt legally. These are the consequences." "And the boat?" Sam's voice cut through the tension. He had risen from his chair, standing with the aid of a cane Sarah had insisted he use. "This is really about the Nighthawk, isn't it?" Blackwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Captain Reynolds, should you be up and about so soon after your episode?" "Some things are worth getting out of bed for," Sam replied, moving forward until he stood face to face with Blackwell. Despite his physical frailty, the old captain's military bearing was unmistakable, like making sure justice is finally served. A moment of silent tension stretched between them, decades of hidden history almost palpable in the air. Finally, Blackwell turned to Deputy Collins. "I believe we have a clear case of trespassing here. These people are on private property, my property, against the will of the legal owner." Collins shifted uncomfortably, looking from Blackwell to the assembled townspeople, many of whom he had known his entire life. "Mr. Blackwell, perhaps a bit more time would be appropriate. Allow Ms. Carter to remove her personal property and make arrangements." "The notice is quite clear, Deputy," Blackwell interrupted coldly. "Immediate vacancy is required." The impasse might have continued indefinitely if not for the sound of tires on gravel outside, followed by a car door slamming and hurried footsteps. Maggie Walsh burst into the workshop, breathless and triumphant. "Emily, I found something." She pushed through the crowd, stopping short when she saw Blackwell and the deputy. Well, right on schedule, I see. Ms. Walsh, Blackwell acknowledged stiffly, this is a private legal matter, not a media event. Maggie smiled without warmth. Everything's a media event when it involves attempting to bury evidence of historical significance. She turned to Emily, holding up a file folder. Naval Archives came through. I requested emergency access to declassified Korean War records based on the Nighthawk's hull identification number. Emily took the folder, opening it to find photocopies of official documents, many stamped DE classified in red ink. It's all there, Maggie continued. The Nighthawk's official service record, mission logs, and most importantly, the investigation into its disappearance. Blackwell's composure slipped momentarily. Those records are still classified. Actually, they were declassified in 2010 under the Military Records Transparency Act, Maggie corrected, including the inquiry into Colonel Richard Blackwell Sr.'s unauthorized operations and the falsification of records regarding the Nighthawk scuttling. She turned to address the gathered crowd. The official record now confirms that the Nighthawk was ordered scuttled to destroy evidence of illegal weapons transfers to guerrilla forces in North Korea, operations run by Colonel Blackwell without proper authorization. Sam stepped forward, taking the documents from Emily and examining them with practiced efficiency. These confirm everything in Matthew's journal: the unauthorized missions, the weapons transfers, the cover-up. Blackwell's face had gone rigid. My father was a decorated naval officer who served his country with distinction. Your father was a war profiteer who sacrificed his men to protect his reputation, Sam countered, his voice steady but intense. Matthew Parker died trying to protect the truth about what really happened. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Emily realized that until this moment, she had never publicly shared the full story of Matthew Parker's sacrifice. Honor isn't something you're given, Sam continued, addressing not just Blackwell, but everyone present. It's something you prove every day through your actions. Your father failed that test, Mr. Blackwell. The question is whether you'll follow his example or forge a better path. For a long moment, Blackwell stood motionless, the weight of decades of family mythology visibly crumbling around him. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its imperious confidence. We can't change the past, Captain Reynolds. What's done is done. We can't change the past, Emily agreed, stepping forward. But we can choose how we face it. Blackwell looked from Emily to Sam, then to the Nighthawk behind them. Something in his expression shifted. Not surrender exactly, but a recognition of defeat. Keep the boat, he said finally. But this changes nothing about the foreclosure. Business is business. As he turned to leave, Maggie called after him. Mr. Blackwell, any comment on how the Blackwell Military Heritage Foundation will address these revelations? I understand your family's reputation is built largely on your father's war record. Blackwell paused but didn't turn around. Without another word, he continued out the door, his attorney following closely behind. Only Deputy Collins remained, looking decidedly uncomfortable. I'll need to consult with the county attorney about this foreclosure notice, he said, carefully not making eye contact with anyone. Given the circumstances, I'm sure we can arrange a temporary stay until things are sorted out legally. With a nod that might have been apologetic, he too departed. In the wake of their exit, the workshop erupted in cheers and congratulations. Emily found herself surrounded by townspeople offering support and expressing outrage at Blackwell's tactics. Yet amid the celebration, she felt strangely hollow. They had won a battle, but not the war. The foreclosure might be delayed, but it was still inevitable. Without the money to pay off her mortgage, she would eventually lose to the shop, regardless of Blackwell's involvement. Sam seemed to sense her thoughts. One victory at a time, he said quietly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Matthew would be proud of what you've done here. Emily nodded, trying to take comfort in that thought. We still need to find that second compartment. There might be more evidence, something that could help us understand what really happened to Matthew and how the Nighthawk survived. The afternoon that followed was a blur of activity. While most of the volunteers continued work on the Nighthawk's restoration, Emily, Sam, and a few others focused on locating the hidden compartment in the medical station area. By late afternoon, their persistence was rewarded. A false panel in the bulkhead gave way under careful pressure, revealing a narrow space between structural elements. Inside was a waterproof medical supply case, the kind used by Navy corpsmen in the field. With trembling hands, Emily removed it and carried it to her workbench. Sam joined her, along with Sarah and Maggie, who had remained to document the discovery. "Should we open it?" Emily asked, looking to Sam. The old captain nodded, his expression solemn. Matthew meant for it to be found. Otherwise, he wouldn't have hidden it so carefully. Emily released the latches on the case and lifted the lid. Inside, protected by layers of waterproof material, were several items. A small leather-bound book, different from the journal they'd already found. A sealed envelope addressed to Captain Samuel J. Reynolds. A set of black and white photographs, and what appeared to be official naval orders on letterhead. Sam reached for the envelope bearing his name, his hand visibly shaking. He broke the seal carefully and removed a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age but still perfectly legible. As he read, tears formed in his eyes and slowly tracked down his weathered cheeks. "It's from Matthew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Dated July 29, 1953, after the Nighthawk was supposedly scuttled. He read aloud, "Dear Sam, if you're reading this, then somehow the Nighthawk found her way back to you, just as she was always meant to. I want you to know that what I did willingly. Not for Blackwell, not for the Navy, but for you and the crew who became my family. The Nighthawk never failed her mission. Neither did her crew. I hope someday the truth will be known and her story can be told with pride rather than hidden in shame. Until then, keep sailing true, Captain. Your friend always, Matthew." A reverent silence fell over the small group. Emily felt a deep connection to the man whose words had traveled across 7 decades to reach them. A man who had sacrificed everything to protect his shipmates and the vessel they had served on together. "There's more," she said quietly, examining the other contents of the case. The leather-bound book proved to be Matthew's personal diary, distinct from his official medical log. The photographs showed the Nighthawk's crew in various locations, often with Matthew himself behind the camera rather than in the images. But it was the official documents that proved most revealing. They detailed Colonel Blackwell's unauthorized weapons transfers, including manifests of arms that had gone missing from official inventories, signed transfer orders that had never been properly registered, and most damning of all, financial records showing payments to Blackwell's personal accounts from unnamed sources. "This is what Matthew was protecting," Sam said, carefully examining each document. "Evidence that would have destroyed Blackwell's career and reputation and possibly led to criminal charges." "But how did the Nighthawk survive?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had lingered throughout their investigation. "If Matthew died trying to sail it to neutral waters?" The answer came from the personal diary. In his final entries, Matthew had documented not only his own failing health as infection set in, but also his encounter with a South Korean fishing vessel that had found the drifting Nighthawk nearly a week after the failed scuttling attempt. "August 2nd, 1953, Emily read. "Korean fishing boat spotted Nighthawk this morning. Captain Kim and his son came aboard, found me too weak to stand. They're taking me to their village for medical treatment. Fever very high now, doubt I'll survive, but at least won't die alone at sea. Asked Kim to preserve Nighthawk if possible. Gave him what money I had. Good man. Understands honor." The final entry was nearly illegible, the handwriting deteriorating as Matthew's condition worsened. "August 4th, Kim says can't save me. Infection too advanced. He's promised to honor Nighthawk, keep her safe. I believe him. Sealed evidence in compartment. Perhaps someday someone who needs her will find her, just as she found me when I needed her most." Emily closed the diary gently. "So he did die, but not alone at sea, and the Nighthawk survived because this Captain Kim kept his promise." "For a while at least," Sam nodded, "until somehow, decades later, she broke free or was set adrift again, eventually making her way to our coast." "Like she was looking for someone," Sarah suggested softly. "Someone who needed her." Emily thought about the strange series of coincidences that had led her to Mason's salvage yard on that particular day, with just enough money in her pocket to buy a boat no one else wanted. Had it really been chance? Or something more like destiny? The days that followed brought remarkable changes to Carter's marine repair. The story of the Nighthawk, Matthew Parker's sacrifice, and Colonel Blackwell's cover-up became national news after Maggie's article was picked up by wire services. Veterans groups and historical preservation societies reached out, offering support for the restoration project. Most significantly, the Naval History and Heritage Command sent representatives to authenticate the Nighthawk and officially recognize its historical importance. Their preliminary assessment confirmed what Emily and Sam already knew. The Nighthawk was a unique vessel with exceptional historical value, particularly given its newly discovered role in a previously hidden chapter of Korean War operations. A week after Blackwell's attempted foreclosure, Emily received notice that the Naval Historical Foundation had approved an emergency grant to purchase the Nighthawk for preservation as a floating museum, with the stipulation that Emily would remain its primary caretaker and restoration expert. The grant included funds sufficient to pay off her mortgage and keep the shop operational as a restoration and educational facility. The morning the Nighthawk was scheduled to be moved to the harbor for its official relaunch ceremony, Emily arrived at the workshop before dawn. She wanted a few moments alone with the boat that had changed everything. The Nighthawk gleamed in the soft, pre-dawn light, its restoration now complete. Every plank, every fitting, every detail had been meticulously restored to its original specification, with careful documentation of both the restoration process and the boat's historical significance. Emily ran her hand along the smooth hull, feeling the connection to all who had worked on her, from her original builders to Matthew Parker to Sam Reynolds, and now to Emily herself in the community that had come together to save her. "We did it," she whispered to the boat. "You're going home to the water where you belong." The sound of the workshop door opening announced Sam's arrival. He walked without his cane now, his recovery progressing remarkably well. Sarah followed close behind, along with a woman Emily hadn't met before, elderly but straight-backed, with a quiet dignity that seemed somehow familiar. "Emily," Sam said, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." He gestured to the elderly woman. "This is Catherine Parker, Matthew's daughter." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. His daughter? But I thought, we assumed he had no family. Catherine Parker stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the Nighthawk. "He didn't know about me when he died. My mother was a nurse he met during the war. She was already pregnant when his unit shipped out, but never got the chance to tell him." Her voice was soft but clear. "She received notification of his death months after I was born. All my life she told me stories about my father, the hero, but we never knew exactly what happened to him." Emily struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Parker. Your father was extraordinary." Catherine nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "So I've been learning, thanks to you and Captain Reynolds." She moved closer to the boat, placing a tentative hand on its hull. "It's strange. I feel like I know him now, through his words, his actions, through this boat he loves so much." Sam stepped forward, removing something from his pocket, Matthew's dog tags, which they had found in the hidden compartment. "These belong to you," he said, placing them gently in Catherine's hands. "Your father saved my life more than once. He saved all of us. And after 70 years, he's still teaching us about courage and honor." Catherine closed her fingers around the tags, bringing them to her heart. "Thank you, Captain, for keeping his memory alive all these years." The sun had fully risen by the time the Nighthawk began its journey to the harbor. The entire town seemed to have turned out for the occasion, lining the streets as the boat was carefully transported on a special trailer, escorted by veterans on motorcycles and a color guard from the local Naval Reserve Center. At the harbor, a small stage had been set up near the launching ramp. Representatives from the Naval Historical Foundation, local officials, and various veterans organizations waited to officially welcome the Nighthawk back to service, not as a war vessel this time, but as a living monument to those who had served aboard her. As the ceremonial launching approached, Emily found herself standing between Sam and Catherine, watching as final preparations were made to return the Nighthawk to the water. "What will you do now?" Sam asked quietly, "with the shop secure and the Nighthawk becoming a museum piece?" Emily smiled, the question awakening possibilities she had only begun to consider. "I'm thinking of expanding. The Naval Historical Foundation has suggested turning part of the shop into a wooden boat restoration school, training a new generation of craftspeople to preserve vessels like the Nighthawk." "Matthew would have liked that," Catherine said, "creating something new while honoring the past." The ceremony itself was brief but moving. Speeches were kept to a minimum, focusing instead on the historical significance of the Nighthawk and the remarkable journey that had brought her back to service after 7 decades. When it came time for the actual launching, Emily, Sam, and Catherine were invited to do the honors together. As the Nighthawk slipped gracefully into the harbor waters for the first time since her restoration, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the gathered crowd. Boat horns sounded from vessels throughout the harbor, a nautical salute to a long-lost sister returning home. Emily watched as the Nighthawk settled into the water, riding exactly as Sam had predicted she would, her lines perfectly balanced, her restored hull embracing the sea as if it had never left it. "A ship isn't just built from wood and nails," Sam said beside her, his voice thick with emotion. "It's built from memory and hope, from the dreams of those who sail her and the courage of those who bring her home." Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought of all the hands that had touched the Nighthawk over its long journey, the naval engineers who designed her, the shipwrights who built her, the crew who sailed her into danger, Matthew who had sacrificed everything to preserve her legacy, and finally the community that had come together to ensure she would not be forgotten. As the Nighthawk settled gracefully into her berth, Emily realized that in saving the boat, she had found something she hadn't known she was missing. Not just purpose or community, but a connection to something larger than herself, a story that would continue long after all of them were gone. The true legacy of the Nighthawk wasn't in its timber or its historical significance, but in the lives it had touched, in the stories it would continue to tell for generations to come. Like Matthew Parker himself, it had refused to sink when the world expected it to, instead finding its way home against impossible odds, carrying its precious cargo of truth and memory safely to shore. And in that journey, Emily had found not just a boat worth saving, but a future worth building, plank by plank, story by story, one carefully preserved memory at a time.